Welcome to the Platform to Perform podcast, the podcast for athletes, coaches, and anyone looking to perform at their highest level. If performance is your goal, we aim to provide you with a platform to perform. I'm your host, as always, Todd Davidson, and on episode 25 of the Platform to Perform podcast, I have the Head of Athletic Development at St David's College, Llandudno, Ross Williams. How are you doing today, Ross?
Very well, yeah. Really excited to be here because it's always great to talk shop. So looking forward to it.
Excellent. Let's get stuck in. One of the questions I love asking guests, apart from obviously their background, is why do they do what they do? So you're currently the Head of Athletic Development at St David's College, but why do you do what you do?
Well, I thought I did what I did because of my love of science and that real S&C nerd within me. But since working in a school, especially a school like St David's, which is a special place, and hopefully we'll touch on that, it's because everybody has a natural affinity to enjoy movement. And so many people won't realise that through traditional PE models. I think that to understand your body and how it moves and the joy that we can receive through movement is a massive part of learning about yourself and about education. So it's really my mission to give everybody that equal opportunity.
And you mentioned through traditional models, which we'll get into in just a second. So do you want to give a little bit more background to St David's College? Because you mentioned, as we said, those traditional models and almost hinting at a PE education curriculum that is accessible to all pupils. So do you want to give a little bit more background to St David's College?
So we're a relatively new school, just over 50 years old. And the school was built on a foundation of 3 tiers, one of which being spirituality, the second of which being creativity, and the third being physical tier. So we're lucky in that the sense that physicality is a part of the school ethos, and it's a part of education that shouldn't be separated. Because as I alluded to in my why, if you don't develop that relationship with yourself in terms of your physicality and your movement, I think you're missing out on a big part of learning about who you are. So we're really lucky in that aspect that the school embraces that, and that's through PE and one of the world's leading outdoor education departments as well. So it's been easy in the sense that the school has that in its foundations. So some of my suggestions, which we'll hopefully get onto how to operate this unique curriculum, have really aligned with the direction that the school wants to go in as well.
So in our chatting offline and previous podcast attempts, you mentioned that you come from an S&C background and you've been in the fortunate position to be able to actually write a lot of the curriculum you deliver at St David's. Before we dive into the intricacies of that, there are several people who confuse sport for PE. So do you want to touch upon, in your opinion, what are the key similarities and perhaps the key differences between sport and PE?
Yeah, sure. So for me, there is a difference, but the similarity is movement. Sport is a way of expressing who you are on the pitch or the court or the field, and you express yourself through movement. So that also, unfortunately, becomes a limiting factor. If you have a lower movement competency than other individuals, then sport can be quite marginalizing. And that's why I think it's important that PE is an opportunity to develop a better movement competency so you can access sport if you choose to, or any other physical activity. I mentioned we've got a great outdoor education department, so you may enjoy the outdoors. A better understanding of your movement capacity will help you to enhance that joy of the outdoors. So that's why sport for me can't be the foundation, or it's probably not the most efficient way of building the foundation, which I'm sure we'll touch on as we go.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense to me. And a question, we kind of joked about it offline, but you obviously, your role is head of athletic development. Now, some people may think it's splitting hairs, whether it's athletic development, strength conditioning, or even, as we said offline, you said you would just describe yourself as a PE teacher because it's easier.
Yeah.
What is the difference between, for example, athletic development then and physical education, or is there a difference?
Personally, I don't think there's a difference between athletic development and physical education, because I think everybody has an athletic ability, and everybody has there's an opportunity for everyone to improve that ability. So for me, that is what good PE should encourage. I can differentiate the term S&C a little bit more coming from a performance background, because for me, sport isn't functional. It's got very specific elements, and obviously the injuries that happen in sport just prove, or certainly would be a strong argument to say, it's not functional. So therefore you can kind of justify some of the more sciencey approaches we take in the gym and the specific development exercises, because we're preparing athletes to do something which is specialized. PE needs to be a lot more general. It needs to be about developing a massive variety of movement capacity. And I would call that athletic development as well, because it's developing the opportunity for these children to express themselves in an athletic way. So it may as well be called athletic development as well for me.
No, I like that a lot. It's funny, when I delivered a CPD to the PE department that I was working with a couple of years ago, I was trying to say, look, we're all on the same team here. And I literally drew a Venn diagram, and I had strength and conditioning on one side and PE on the other. And I said, look, we are both trying to create children who are better movers, who can then, if they choose to, enjoy sport, or just physically and psychologically more confident for whatever life throws at them. So that
definitely
makes a lot of sense to me. And in terms of streamlining this message that sport might be a part of PE, but does not necessarily equal PE, how important is it to be able to streamline that message to parents, kids, and other staff members?
It's important to manage expectations, I think. What we're trying to create is an accessible curriculum for all our students. But at the same time, we don't want to be built purely on participation. It's only right that those students who want to excel in a sport have the opportunity to do so. So for me, that's already an easy sell to parents, if they have that expectation of their children. What's nice here is we're able to also say to parents who maybe have a perception about sport that is negative through their own experiences in school, this is not purely about sport. If your child has dyspraxia or a coordination difficulty, we're the perfect place, and we're developing a curriculum that caters for them as well. So that it's nice to be able to have a message that can be differentiated and is genuine. And that's where the real focus needs to be. It's on parents who may have had certain experiences in their own school and saying that this is a different approach, and we aim not to marginalize, but to offer that ability to progress for everyone.
And out of interest, just in preparing for this podcast and us chatting offline, you said what, 60% of your students are either dyslexic or dyspraxic?
It's the other way, so it's about 40%.
40%.
Which is important because, you know, many students won't have those extra challenges. So we need to cater for everyone. But the key message for me is that this is not a PE curriculum for dyslexic and dyspraxia. This is what I believe to be the best approach for everyone in every school. And I think it's the unique challenges that we've had to face here, which has helped me realize that this is probably the approach for everyone.
Yeah, and it's funny, just on this subject of, for example, dyslexic children or other children with special educational needs, the amount of times I've had CPD on it, and I think to myself, let's not, for example, I know it sounds semantic, but these aren't dyslexic children, dyspraxic children. These are children with dyslexia, with dyspraxia. Yeah. And 100%. Oftentimes the CPD is stuff, and you're like, hang on a minute, isn't this just good teaching? And it'll be like, oh, make sure you give simple, clear instructions, make sure there's a demonstration, make sure there's, other opportunities for them to access it. And you're like, hang on a minute, shouldn't we be doing this regardless of a child's specific needs?
Oh yeah, completely agree with you there. Definitely.
So how do you, out of interest, with your children who do have dyslexia, dyspraxia, or other educational needs, I'm assuming because there's quite a large percentage of your cohort that do have these needs,
yeah,
I'm assuming that they will be in a class with children who, for example, I don't know, higher ability pupils, or so they're all in that same class?
That's right, yeah, and I think that's such a valuable aspect as well. We've built a curriculum that is leveled on effort rather than ability. So what that affords to our students is you could have somebody who is less sort of naturally able in terms of sport, for example, teaching the first team rugby, fly half, how to move in the gym. Because there's no sort of hierarchy in terms of ranking, because we've completely changed our leveling process. So if you take advantage of the provision that's on offer, you will get a better level rather than turning up with an ability and expressing that ability and doing nothing else. Won't necessarily get you the highest level.
I like that a lot because, for example, in one of the classes I was teaching this week, one of the girls asked, "Oh, what set is this?" And I felt like saying, "The set is irrelevant. Like,
yeah.
You shouldn't be putting in any less or any more effort just because you're in, I don't know, set 1, set 3, or whether you're even in a set."
Yeah, definitely, that's the way it should be. And it was really evident for us over lockdown. We did a lot of online teaching, and some of our students who may not sort of have a natural affinity to want to express themselves through sport really stepped up and developed a really good relationship with how they move and kind of challenging themselves on that movement, because there was no there was no opportunity to do it in a team sport environment. So the fact that our curriculum allowed them to be rewarded for that was a really nice reflection.
And we spoke briefly in our previous podcast attempt about one of the issues with a sport-based PE model, in that it inadvertently sets kids up for failure. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that, if you can remember the conversation?
Yeah, so I remember putting something on Twitter a while back. I think I said, does sport develop movement competency, or does it just highlight those that can already move? And I think it's probably the latter in most cases. We're asking, in a lot of cases, we're asking children to perform sport skills, which I sort of term them as movement problems, without the tools to unpick those problems. And that creates a lot of, in my experience, psychological fear and then marginalization. And that's probably worse in a sports approach that focuses on isolated skills, because it can make it even more evident. We try and deliver purely through gamification, which I know we might touch on, which feels safer for the student because access can be really individualized and tailored. But the most important thing is that they're learning how to solve these movement problems before we ask them to add more complexity, which are sports skills.
Yeah, and it's funny because what you say there, again, is one of my arguments against a sport-based model, in that sport is inherently so complex. And when you go into sport in its traditional sense with its traditional set of rules, there are so many things for a kid to learn that even if they did have all the movement skills, it's just so overwhelming. And again, I really like the point you made there about movement competencies and highlighting it. A phrase that I came across in a book that I was reading the other day is something called the Matthew effect. And it basically says that kids who have something will then continue to gain more of it, and kids who have not will continue to get worse of it. So if you've got kids who have had sporty parents, who have had a sporty upbringing, then they thrive in this sport-based model, whereas kids who haven't just simply get left behind. For me, in any subject, that's like, imagine if you had a maths or an English curriculum and it's like, oh, well, you didn't get taught sums by your parents, you don't read to your parents. Oh, well, that's a shame, because guess what we're going to be doing?
Yeah, definitely.
And in terms of your, in terms of integrating your movement into your lessons, then in one of your blogs I was reading, you described it as a semi-organized functional movement session. So in our chat, you mentioned that you're a strength and conditioning coach, almost coming into a physical education world and trying to strike the balance. So do you want to elaborate a little bit on what semi-organized looks like to you?
Yeah, of course. One point I'd like to make, which I think is key, is that it's great to see S&C professionals getting opportunities in education. I think we can add lots of value there, but it's important to stress that we don't try and turn PE into mini versions of elite sport and academies. I think you mentioned it, Todd, offline. They're children at the end of the day, and everything needs to have fun at its core. So for me, semi-organized means themes. If the theme, we often like to start the year with kind of landing mechanics, but there's no reason for me in a PE lesson to go into great detail as to breaking down position, what does it look like, layering up progressions. We can play tons of games to get landing mechanics in. We can move, we can jump around like frogs. We can play adapted versions of end ball, net ball, where they're asked to stop with the ball. We can harness good PE practitioners and the knowledge they might have that we don't, and collaborate on, here's the theme, it's landing mechanics. What games can we play which involve some decelerating, some jumping and landing? And then can we just break away for a minute of a 10-minute session just to give some context to the students? And maybe that doesn't happen at all in 5, 6, 7, 8. Maybe it's just the year 9s who get that extra little bit of context. But we certainly, in my opinion, shouldn't be going in with an overly structured progression by progression linear approach. It should be just, we're assuming that by playing enough games, guiding with our professional knowledge, but from the background, they're accumulating layers of these things almost unconsciously until they become older and able to or even take more of an interest in it.
I think you've absolutely nailed it there, because I think it's so easy as a strength and conditioning coach going into PE teaching, and I mean, I'm certainly guilty of it, where I've sat back and observed PE and I've thought, what, you've done no warm-up whatsoever, where are the movement skills coming in? And it's easy to be biased or think that, and we discussed about the notion of strength and conditioning versus personal training, and it's not that, same with PE and S&C, it's not that one is inherently better than the other, it's different skill sets which absolutely can learn from each other.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I think it's a Vern Gambetter phrase that I've used in previous presentations, and it's strength and conditioning on tap, not on top, because it's too easy to bulldoze your way into sessions and, as you said, try and come up with this genius model, and I don't know, let's assume behavior is not an issue, and by the end
Yeah.
of secondary school, all the kids can do it, but they're so bored they never want to use these movement skills, or even they don't want to explore movement skills because you've done it in such a linear or step-by-step way.
Definitely. I think it's got to be, people talk about tactical periodization in elite sport. It's that collaboration between all the teachers and what we can all bring, and that needs to happen away from the lesson, so that we all can come together and harness the energy of the children and guide it towards some different themes we have, rather than me or any PE teacher thinking that we are, the most important part of the process. We're not. It's about the children, and how we can enhance their experience, not about how we can sort of project onto them what we think would be optimal.
Yeah, no, absolutely nailed it for my money there. In terms of your curriculum, then, we were having a chat about it offline. Do you want to give an overview of what your curriculum currently looks like?
Yeah, sure. So we're looking at sort of Key Stage 3. They get 3 80-minute curriculum lessons a week. One of those lessons, they rotate between 3 activities every 2 weeks. And those activities are in the gym with myself, which I can expand on a bit more what we do. Another one called continuous movement, which is taking some of the concepts of your traditional sort of cross-country, sort of endurance type activities and putting them within games. So they're just continuously moving in something that's probably going to look more like a computer game than a cross-country course. And then the third one is some kind of racket sport, just because we like the crossover in terms of movement skills and a little bit of tactical awareness. So that's one lesson. They rotate between those 3 things. Second 80-minute lesson is what we've called donor sports, where we will explore any sport. It's really important that I emphasize that, because any sport can be a donor sport. And then the third one is what we've called focus sports. And they're just the sports that we have a good affinity for as a smaller school and tend to do well in. But it's all delivered through gamification. So none of those sports that we focus on, I would hope, look like your sort of traditional club-based approaches, perhaps. That's the overview, as well as that activity schedule. Children could be getting up to 8 hours of physical activity a week if they want it.
I mean, I like that a lot. I mean, we'll dive into the continuous movement in a second, but one of the reasons I like that so much is, for example, I always have kids, and I'm sure you have it probably too, where kids will say, "Oh, can we play a game?" And even though you'll design a game, if the game isn't exactly the sport they know, even if it's a sport with minor tweaks, they'll still ask, "When are we playing a game?" Like, they won't connect the dots. And I explained to one of my pupils this week, who's like, "Can we have a game of dodgeball?" Despite the fact we played dodgeball, and the only condition I had was that rather than somebody going out, they would just do something like perform 3 squats and be back in. And that the higher ability pupils, I restricted them to specific throwing zones to challenge them a little bit more.
Yeah, nice.
And I tried to explain to her the reason why I do things like this is because I believe traditional sport in the format we're used to seeing it, as you said, marginalizes pupils. So in dodgeball, the kid who can't throw, can't catch, can't dodge, is then going to sit out and get less movement experience, despite the fact they need more of it. And even if we take something like netball in its traditional format, you've now got a child who is restricted to a zone, and there's one ball, 6 other players, and they never see the ball. And you think, if you put heart rate monitors on these children, with some of them, this is the only physical activity they get a week. And if you looked at their heart rate zone, you'd think they were probably sat in a classroom reading a book or something.
Mm-hmm.
So your continuous movement, and you talk about stealing ideas from computer games. So do you want to just give us an overview of what that might look like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we had a look at how we do things this year, and if you say to a child, you know, we're gonna run cross country, you're already speaking to a smaller percentage who are going to have an enjoyment for that. And so what we like to do is give autonomy to the pupils. So if we create a game where the amount of movement they do is self-determined, but we also remove the barriers for access, then we're hoping they'll develop an intrinsic motivation through enjoyment of the game. And then the difficulty comes in for us as adults is we're competing to design games that are as instantaneously rewardable as computer games. And I don't anyway play these games that much, and I wasn't a big gamer when I grew up. So we really try and find out from even our youngest students what's meaningful to them. So it could be a traditional game of tip or tag. They're hopefully continuously moving if we can add constraints that, you know, allow access for everyone to do so. And then asking the children, you know, how do we enhance your experience? Is it bringing in a power-up zone or a respawn zone? You know, some of these terms from games that we see. Some of the boys will get a rugby tackle bag and we'll call it a riot shield, or they'll run around with a tag belt and we'll call them lives or tokens. And a lot of this comes from talking with the students. What's big in the gaming world for you at the moment? I spend a lot of time in the boarding houses doing duty now, and when they're playing on games, I'm getting my notebook out. Why is this meaningful to you? You know, do you enjoy this? Do you like the side missions, or do you like the progression through the levels? And often it's the side missions they like. So we can play a game of end ball. Every point that's scored, you come out of the game and do a connect four with cones on the side. And some will find more meaning in the side mission than they will in the actual game. This has all come from our understanding of computer games at the moment.
I think that's absolutely class. One thing you've mentioned there that I don't know why I've never thought about it, but I'm always intrigued as to, for example, I know if I did a basketball lesson, I said, we're doing shooting and all you're going to do is shoot for the next 60 minutes. I know that some of my classes would absolutely love it. And now you've mentioned it, I can only think the reason why it's so enjoyable is you shoot and you score, you shoot and you miss. Without anyone telling you anything, you've got an instant feedback loop. And even if the technique's wrong, I mean, who cares if it's gone in the basket? That's a brilliant point. And I also like the side levels, the side missions thing, because I've definitely been guilty of, as soon as the team scores, new condition, until eventually you've got the higher ability team and the low ability team still playing each other, but effectively playing several different variations of the game. That's class. I like that a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, you can have a side mission and you could pull out 6 of your higher ability pupils to play the side mission. Changes the game, offers more access to those who have been struggling to engage, or you can take out those that are struggling to engage. Same concept. If the game involves catching and throwing, and you've got students who may have some anxiety around the ball, we've given them things like pool noodles and said, right, you're a drone, go and tap as many people as you can, give them some targets, because then they're continuously moving, but you've taken away some of the complexity and increased their affordance to engage. So they're happy because they're now engaged in a way that's meaningful for them, without over stressing the point of why they may have struggled to engage.
Yeah, that's nice. I like that. And it's also a more subtle way of dealing with things. I had a pupil in a rugby lesson the other day, and I noticed he was very overly cautious. I said, "Oh, what's the matter?" I could tell you obviously movement skills weren't the best, but he just said, "Oh, I'm scared of the ball." And I was a bit like, "Oh, well, I was going to give you, I don't know, a superpower where you can't get tackled, or, you know," but that, dare I say, only highlights the issue more, because it's like, oh, well, we can't tackle this pupil. And he's probably more than aware that that constraint has been made to avoid the issue rather than circumnavigate it. So I might have to steal that pool noodle idea.
Yeah, no worries. So the equipment we've get out each lesson looks absolutely mad, but I love it, you know. And often they come up with their own ways to use it as well, which is a two-way process. So I learned so much off them, probably more so than they pick up from us.
And in one of your videos that I saw online the other week, you were talking about, and I can't remember whether it was this podcast or a chat offline, but we were talking about how isolated skill practice actually just highlights those who cannot do. I saw a video where it might have been yourself, it might have been a colleague, and you had a massive Swiss ball and were just bouncing a rugby ball off to catch a rugby pass. Do you want to go into a little bit more detail about how you can have, dare I say, a better version of an isolated drill that still offers variability?
Well, I think that's the key word, Todd. It's variability. It's skill drills for me have a limited sort of usefulness. The only positive I can see personally, and this obviously is my opinion, is for context. But even when we're using a skill drill for context, it's how we catch and pass. For me, there needs to be an element of variability in it. Otherwise, it soon runs its course in terms of usefulness. And then, as you mentioned, for not wanting to highlight the students who struggle to access those skills, if you hide it within variability, it becomes less clear, and obvious who can and can't do it as well. And we use flow state concepts. So if we can start with activities that give a little bit of anxiety, they're a bit unsure, but we know there's going to be plenty of opportunities for success first, and then we increase the complexity, we can hopefully reduce this fear of the ball or fear of the tackle. It's all about psychological safety. Maybe to give an example, if you were looking at catch and pass as a basic skill and started with a game of, we've been playing a lot of Gaelic football, and over the course of 20 minutes, you slowly bleed into traditional rugby, that fear of handling the ball reduces, because we maybe started with a Swiss ball, playing Gaelic football with a big giant Swiss ball, and then we've gone down to a football, and we haven't said you've just got to catch. You can kick, you can bounce, you can tap it off straight away. And then by the time we get to rugby, we've hopefully got them into flow state where they are less fearful of the ball, and they're starting to use the ball to manipulate their opposition as an added extra rather than not wanting the ball. So you can't say we haven't been looking at the skills of catch and pass, but they've been embedded within this variable environment where that skill can look 10 different ways in 10 different touches, but it's still the fundamental skill of catching and passing.
And I think what you just said there is another argument for me anyway, why PE doesn't have to look like traditional sport. Because if you're still focusing on passing and catching, as you said, a lot of kids who haven't accumulated hours and hours of sport or free play, even the shape of a rugby ball, it just feels off to them. So what you described there, I think is perfect. And again, another reason why sport in its traditional format is not perhaps the best vehicle to drive kids towards physical literacy.
Yeah, definitely.
No, I like that a lot. How have you, out of interest, played about with gamifying the fundamental movements? So we spoke about not necessarily using the same provision for movement that you would in an S&C session versus a PE lesson. So how have you gone about gamifying those types of movements, out of interest?
We've just tried to add competition, and then we let the students select their own teams more so when we're looking at movement exclusively than when we're looking at more complex sports skills. So if we're looking at jumping, for example, if you can partner up with someone and then compare the distance jumped, and then we can walk around as a staff body and guide with some questioning over technique and outcomes, rather than getting the group together, showing them the skill and the intricacies of positioning, and then asking them to perform it. We like to start with what can you do, and add some incentive through competition, and then guide and question. And we might start with a game of tip if we're looking at change of direction, and then we'll pull a child out who's really engaged. What's fun about this? How can we make it more fun? Or we'll pull out someone who's less engaged. How can we help you access this game of tip? Is the pitch too big? Do you feel there's too many people? And we may split into smaller games of tip with 4 aside, get them bibbed up, blow a whistle, send a seeker out from each team to go into another team. You can do this with a ball as well. I guess what I'm trying to say is a lot of our lessons will start with play straight away. And if I want them to interact with the ground from a movement standpoint, we'll play our game of tip with animal movements. If I want them to evade, change direction, we'll play our game of tip on our feet, sometimes with equipment, sometimes without. But a lesson will very, very rarely start with instruction and demonstration.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And again, that for me is another thing where I was having a chat with another guy who's appeared on the podcast, Tom Green, and we said that what we're starting to notice is S&Cs within school environments, or differences between academies and schools, is from a gym perspective, you might have a ramp warm up and you might do some movement, and you'll do some activation mobility, then you'll potentiate. Whereas when you're working with kids who may or may not be sporty, like in my mind, I'm like, you just need to let them get going. And the more you can be like, right, here's the rules, go, rather than, right, jog around these cones, now side shuffle. The more you get them going, the quicker you're going to get that engagement.
100%. I mean, we've got a really captive audience. But to do that, to do that more formal approach, like a ramp method, is really difficult. They're bouncing off the walls. They want to get going. So the more we can harness that energy, the better. I feel the session flows a lot better. When I try and take control, if you like, I feel that's where it becomes difficult. And I also don't think that's what we should be doing. If they come down with bags of energy, we shouldn't be punishing them for that and tell them to sit down, be quiet, listen to the instructions. We should be thinking, great, they want to be here, they're engaged, let's give them something to invest that energy into straight away. And we can layer up the complexity as we go. Every child knows how to play stuck in the mud. You can tell the first year 7 who's down at the pitch, that's what you're going to be doing. You can step back, watch the game develop, see who's engaged, who's not engaged, and then that can guide where you go next. And if your theme is to look at changing body heights, just add that constraint in 2 minutes into the game. You don't have to start by setting out your intentions to the whole group, especially when you've got 40 odd year 7s who just want to run around and have fun. Let's go with that as much as possible.
And also, I think a slight difference between PE and strength and conditioning is in academies, typically, or if you've got some kind of decent ethos, you will have everyone arrive at the same time. So if you've got your intricate ramp warm-up set up, you can just get straight in. Whereas there's nothing that kills the energy more in a PE lesson than when you get, for example, your kids who are desperate to get running around and they get to the lesson on time, and then a couple of minutes late. There's nothing worse than telling the kid who's desperate to get going, no, you need to wait until we've got the whole class here, because it messes with my intricate ramp warm-up.
Oh yeah, 100%. Give that first child that gets there a tennis ball, ask him to show you what he can do with it, and then he can show the next person to come down, she can show the next person. all of a sudden you've got 40 tennis balls being thrown about, and then you can, blow your whistle or shout something out. Next up, I want you to do this. And they've all got their equipment. Some of them have been moving for 2 minutes. Some of them have just arrived. But the flow of the session is so much better. And you've already got one of your outcomes, which is engagement from everyone. And it's self-determined and self-led by those that arrive first, because they are going to get those extra layers and extra exposure. But you're affording the same opportunity to every student to do that.
Absolutely. Something that a colleague of mine mentioned when we were talking about lesson planning the other day, which I really liked, was so we were talking about how lesson planning differs when you're on your PGC versus when you're in your first official teaching role. And he mentioned that one of the schools he was on placement with, and I love this idea, they wanted to come up with what they called a 5-minute lesson plan. Now, not to say, oh, you should only spend 5 minutes investing in it, but just the idea as a concept. And the first thing they wanted was what they called a hook. So how are you getting kids engagement? Now, I know we said about moving away from a sport-based model of PE, but I'm just going to use this as an example. But if, for example, I could dunk, which at 5'7" is probably never going to happen, but if you've got that first kid who's keen as mustard, hooked on, I don't know, you show them a dunk or you show them a layup or whatever, and he's desperate to see if he can try it, already you've got the context for your lesson set out. And even the kids who are now arriving a little bit late, if you've had time to coach this kid one-on-one, they're like, oh, that's cool, I want to do that. And where the position I'd love to get to as a teacher is that hook is so good that the kids are almost running to the lesson because they don't want to miss out, because that is going to be the best bit.
Yeah, definitely. It comes down to environment for me. We are, I see my biggest job as being like the architect of the environment rather than the leader of every single element of the session. So I like to step back as much as possible and let it play out. For me, the detail of the session comes from my knowledge and experience, and is for me. The kids don't need to know everything I know, because I'm not the one that's playing, and that would take away the fun and the enjoyment. So if I can put everything into creating this environment, like you say, that is a giant hook, then that's where I see my investment being the most valuable, rather than in the detail of everything we do within that environment.
And I think that's also, for me, another key potential difference with S&C and PE. Now, not to say that just because you're in a strength and conditioning environment, you need to bore the athlete with trying the mechanics of their landing and how it reduces injury or anything like that.
Yeah.
But at PE level, there's what they absolutely need to know. And if they express an interest, maybe you have a discussion. But there's no need for them to know all the ideas that are in your head at any one time.
Definitely. I think we need to support their autonomy. And as I mentioned, our method for leveling, it's about self-determination. So the provision and the extra detail is there if they express an interest in it, but they're not, it sounds awful, they're not like empty vessels for us to fill with our knowledge. It's on offer if they show that intrinsic interest to want to know more.
Absolutely. And just coming into a close a little bit, obviously you mentioned you do a lot of work with pupils with dyspraxia. Do you have any general, you've kind of given a few examples indirectly throughout the podcast. Do you have any general recommendations for easy differentiation, for want of a better word, when it comes to either lesson planning or specific models within PE or anything like that?
In terms of a movement point of view, the stuff we do in the gym on that rotation I mentioned, I found that external cues work really well with dyspraxic students. The model I've kind of developed is to use an object or something external to remove some of the anxiety around movement. And then when they've acquired that movement, we go back into the awareness of their own body. So to give you an example, I think I put a video up yesterday on Twitter of rolling some kind of ball up and down your spine because there's they can connect to the feeling of where the ball is, rather than asking them to, move segments of their spine, which is hard for anyone, regardless of if you're dyspraxic or not. And then we can question. It's the same as our approach to gamification in sports. It's about guiding and nudging and questioning, rather than presenting with the technical model and then, holding them to that. So yeah, I like to use an object to remove anxiety about movement. As they develop more control of the object or the external thing, we go back into the awareness of how they've done that. And that could be with peer coaching or videos. That's kind of the approach in the gym. In terms of what we do down on the pitch, because we're not asking for isolated skills, we can tailor the access based on where they're at in terms of movement competency. So like I said, if they are struggling with the catch and pass concept, and this is resulting in them not moving at all in the lesson, can we remove that complexity so that they start moving by giving them a role like a drone with a pool noodle? And then, or can we change the size of the ball or add multiple balls so that those students who are struggling to access have more touches? And I think when you lead with isolated skills, it's difficult to do this stuff, but there are essentially no rules to what we're doing. The rules are everyone engages and everyone gets stretched to their level. So you put you have your own take on that as a practitioner.
No, I love that. And I also think, again, going back to probably what's been the theme of this podcast, is if you start with just sport and that is your quote unquote outcome, then already the kids are disengaged and already it's hard to stretch. Because even if hypothetically you think, right, well, we'll just add a different ball into this isolated drill, you're still going to have students who can't do it. And dare I say, if you've got, for example, your low ability pupil with a giant Swiss ball or beach ball or whatever, and you're doing isolated work and you've got other kids with a rugby ball, it's almost a big marker of, guess what, this kid, even though kids might not be that switched on to realize, it's still, oh, hey, this kid can't do it.
Yeah, definitely. It's very subtle, our approach, I feel, and know that it's not clear who is using that equipment because they feel more comfortable, or who has naturally been so sort of engrossed in the game that that's what they've picked up just as part of their expression of joy and being in the moment.
Yeah, brilliant. I couldn't have said it any better. And in wrapping up, so I've got 4 questions left. If you could observe one other coach or one other teacher or person, whoever, with their athletes or the people they work with, who would you observe and why?
We haven't really mentioned it. We've talked lots of good stuff, but I think environment and culture is huge. For a small school of 260 pupils, we punch well above our weight in senior rugby. So for me, Rassie Erasmus, South Africa head coach, I think that would be so interesting. I think the players run through walls for him, and I would love to be a fly on the wall in terms of that culture, environment building process. Because for us as PE teachers, we have the unique point of view of seeing students outside the context of a lesson. Our lessons never end. They're on the playground. They're a passing comment in the corridor. We're lucky students will come up to us during break times. So how do we harness that, build an environment and culture that feeds itself, is massive. I'm a massive fan of Russell Earnshaw and the Magic Academy. I think more S&C professionals need to look at the human element of coaching. That comes before anything for me. And I think their methodology around engagement is really interesting. I've never actually seen Rusty in person coaching, so I know he does a lot of stuff, but that would be something I'd be keen to do. So they're my 2, just off the cuff.
Brilliant. And if you could give listeners one key take home for this podcast?
It's support autonomy for me. I think we need to realize we're not the most important part of the process as a teacher, coach, S&C coach. Even if you're dealing with higher level athletes, can you almost make yourself redundant in that you're supporting that athlete's autonomy to look after themselves, become better problem solvers, decision makers, well-rounded individuals. And that can only be done for me when we realize that we are the guides, the architects, the nudges, not the key, central part.
Yeah, spot on. I like that a lot. And one recommended resource, so it can be a podcast, a book, an app, maybe something you use daily.
What I use daily is a technique called motivational interviewing.
Yeah.
And Stephen Rolnick's got a great book called Coaching Athletes to Be Their Best. That if we want to do what I've just alluded to and support autonomy, be the guides, we need to use an approach and language that promotes that. And for me, that book is a great resource for any teacher or coach, regardless of subject. I think if you read that book, you'd probably implement parts of it.
Who was the author? I'll put that in the show notes.
Stephen Rolnick. He's a South African guy.
How do you spell Rolnick?
Oh,
don't worry, I can Google it if needs be.
Yeah, I'll send you it because I don't want to make a mistake. I am dyslexic myself, so I don't want to do him a disservice.
No, not a problem at all. And finally, for example, I've seen some of the brilliant stuff, the videos you've been putting out on Twitter. But if anyone wants to reach out to you, how will they get in touch?
Yeah, probably Twitter. I like Twitter because I like to be really transparent with what we're doing, and I'd like more people to offer some feedback, negative or positive. Everything we're doing on there is pretty raw. I'll just get my phone out and be quite in the moment with what I'm seeing. So I'm big on Twitter. Instagram, I use less so, but I do have a platform on there, and I'm happy to give you my email. People can get in touch if they want to go into more detail.
Perfect. And your Twitter handle for those people listening? I mean, I'll put this in the show notes anyway.
Yeah, Twitter handle's just _and coach. It used to be S&C coach, but then as we probably alluded to, I wasn't quite as sure that that's what I was anymore, nor did I want to be. So it's just and coach. So you can put whatever you want before that now is the thinking behind it.
Fair enough. Right, I'll stop the recording there and I will chat to you offline. But thank you very much for giving up your time on a Sunday afternoon, Ross.
No problem at all. It's been very enjoyable. A really reflective process for myself as well, which is great.
Happy days. Right, I will speak to you offline in a second.